There is this persistent, quiet anxiety humming in the background of the American economy lately. Have you noticed it? Across the country, families who, by all traditional measures, really should be living comfortably are instead feeling an intense financial strain. Well, in this explainer, we are diving deep into the macroeconomic forces behind the disappearing American middle class.
It's a question echoing at kitchen tables nationwide. Why does it feel so hard just to break even? Look, if you're feeling this personal financial stress right now, I want to completely validate that for you. It's really not just you. What you're experiencing is actually the result of a massive systemic macroeconomic shift. Together, we are going to solve this mystery, and we're going to do it using hard data from the Federal Reserve, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the Census Bureau, and the Congressional Budget Office. To understand the sheer scale of what we're dealing with, we have to look at this absolutely shocking anchor statistic. $18.8 trillion. That is the total U.S. household debt as of the first quarter of 2026. This number is literally staggering. It shows just how desperately families are trying to bridge the massive gap between what they earn and what it actually costs to live. But to truly grasp how we got to nearly $19 trillion in debt, we really have to examine where all this pressure is coming from.
Part 1. The middle class squeeze. Incomes versus reality. So, in 2024, the real median household income in the United States recovered to $83,730. Now, on paper, that sounds like a pretty solid foundation, right? But here is the harsh reality check. Over 67% of a middle-class budget is instantly swallowed up by pure essentials. We're talking housing, transportation, and food. When over 2/3 of your income is entirely non-discretionary, well, that breathing room that used to define the middle class practically vanishes. Let's move to part 2, the great wage decoupling. This is the smoking gun. From the 1950s through the early 1970s, America experienced this incredible period of shared prosperity. Basically, if you worked hard and the economy grew, your pay grew right alongside it. It was like clockwork. Productivity grew at 2.8% annually, and hourly compensation followed right behind at 2.6%. But in the mid-1970s, that relationship violently severed. The economy kept producing more and more efficiently, but workers completely stopped seeing those rewards in their paychecks. You can see this clearly in the data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. This divergence just accelerates over the decades. When productivity goes way up but compensation stays completely flat, a critical economic shift happens. The labor share of income falls. Suddenly, a much larger portion of the economic pie is diverted away from everyday wages and shifted toward corporate profits, capital investments, and returns for shareholders. Let's quickly walk through this macroeconomic timeline to see how this played out over 70 years. In the 1950s, a single earner could reliably secure a home and a really stable standard of living. Then comes the 1970s, the great decoupling we were just talking about. Fast forward to the 2000s. Wages were so stagnant that the middle class had to turn to heavy borrowing just to maintain their lifestyle, which led directly into the 2008 credit-driven housing bust. And that brings us to 2026, where we find ourselves in a high interest rate regime, making the cost of carrying all that accumulated debt incredibly expensive. We transition from single earner stability to highly leveraged vulnerability. Which brings us to part 3, a dramatic wealth shift. Get this, by 2022, the top 10% of households captured 60% of all wealth in the country. Meanwhile, the bottom 50%, literally half the entire population, holds just 6%. The top 10% now own more than the remaining 90% combined. This is a massive gap that has grown relentlessly over the last 3 decades, completely altering the landscape of the American dream. According to Congressional Budget Office data tracking average income from 1979 to 2022, the mechanics of this shift become crystal clear. Now, while all groups saw some growth over this 40-year period, income for households at the very top absolutely skyrocketed. It totally dwarfed the modest gains made by the middle and lowest quintiles. The economic growth simply was not shared equally. And when the economy did stumble, the middle class absolutely took the hardest hit. Economists actually call the period following the 2008 crash a wealthless recovery. Between 2007 and 2010, the middle 30% of Americans lost a staggering 40% of their wealth. Why? Because middle-class wealth was overwhelmingly tied up in home equity, and they were heavily leveraged. When the housing market collapsed, it wiped out decades of savings in an instant. To make matters even worse, many were forced to step back from the stock market, meaning they completely missed out on the historic bull run that fueled the recovery for the wealthy. Part 4. The household debt trap. So let's break down that $18.8 trillion number from the very beginning. As of the first quarter of 2026, mortgages obviously dominate the portfolio at over $13 trillion. But look closer at the rest of this table. We have $1.68 trillion in auto loans, mostly driven by skyrocketing vehicle prices. We have $1.65 trillion in student loans, weighing down younger and middle-aged adults. And perhaps most alarmingly, $1.25 trillion in credit card debt. That soaring reliance on credit cards tells us families are increasingly using high-interest revolving debt just to cover the basic rising costs of daily living.
This level of debt creates immense financial vulnerability. Right now, debt service, meaning just making the minimum payments, consumes over 11% of disposable income. And because of this incredibly tight squeeze, we are seeing credit card delinquencies climb past 7%, and student loan defaults jump to nearly 11%. When you combine high leverage with low liquid savings, families are essentially living on the edge of a cliff. A single medical emergency, a broken down car, or a temporary job loss can trigger serious delinquency and pull them right out of the middle class entirely.
Part 5. The polarized job market.
So the American economy is experiencing severe job polarization. Basically, this is a structural hollowing out. We are seeing simultaneous growth in high-skill, high-wage jobs like software engineering and management, and massive growth in low-skill, low-wage jobs like food service and retail. But the middle-skill roles, those traditional administrative, clerical, and manufacturing jobs that used to anchor the middle class, they are literally vanishing. So what's actually driving this? It's a perfect storm of relentless technological progress and globalization. Software and robotics are automating routine clerical and manual work. Offshoring continues to move manufacturing assembly overseas. We've also seen a really sharp decline in union density, which erodes the bargaining power workers once used to secure a fair share of productivity gains. Meanwhile, the demand for high-skill, analytical labor just pushes wages up exclusively at the very top. Displaced middle-skill workers are often forced down into the lower-paying service sector, which depresses their wages and heavily limits their upward mobility.
And finally, Part 6. Rebuilding American prosperity.
Now, not all is entirely bleak when we zoom out and look at the whole system. Take Social Security wealth, for example, which is the present value of future benefits workers have actually earned. Because it's distributed far more evenly than private wealth, it acts as a massive equalizing force. In fact, when economists factor Social Security into the equation, the overall measure of wealth inequality drops significantly. For millions of aging middle-class Americans, this is absolutely the critical safety net keeping the floor from collapsing. Yet the pressure on the working-age population remains incredibly intense. Federal Reserve Governor Lael Brainerd captured it perfectly, noting that, increasingly, the onus is on individuals to ensure that their skills are marketable and up-to-date in a highly competitive global marketplace with growing automation. Just think about the immense personal pressure that places on workers today compared to the 1950s. The social contract has totally shifted. The investment risk, the education costs, the retirement funding, it has all been transferred directly onto the shoulders of the individual. Which leaves us with the ultimate question as we wrap up this explainer. Can we adapt our economy to restore the American dream? Or is the traditional middle class gone for good? The data clearly shows a system that has fundamentally changed over the last 70 years, decoupling the fortunes of the average worker from the broader economy. Fixing it will definitely require more than just individual effort. It's going to require structural adaptation. So as you ponder the future of shared prosperity, ask yourself, what kind of economy do we really want to build next?